In this recording, I'd like to talk about data validation. It doesn't really go with advanced functions either, but it really doesn't go with anything. It's not worth a chapter on its own, so I've embedded it in my Unit 5. The book embeds it in Chapter 7, so if you want to read a little bit more, you can read Tutorial 7. What data validation allows you to do, before I start, I'm going to be using the GPA calculator that is in your Unit 5 folder that I did and actually I started this already in Recording 1 and I renamed it GPA Calc. If you didn't follow along in Recording 1, it shouldn't cause you any trouble. You should be able to do or follow along with this recording if you wish without having that first one. What data validation allows you to do is ensure that the user enters the data that they have control over correctly. Sometimes you can add validation to designate that things are required. Sometimes there's a range of values that are required. All this is done through data validation. Data validation focuses on the Data tab. Here's the Data Validation button. To use data validation, you first click in the cell or cells that you want to apply this data validation to. So what I want to do is make sure, first of all, that my user enters a student ID if they touch that cell and leave it without entering. I want to have an error message show up. When I saved my worksheet, I made this the very first cell that's active, and I made this the very first sheet that's active. So when they open this workbook, that's the first cell. They actually have to enter something in there to make this work. Otherwise, they get an error message. To add data validation, you click in the cell and click the data validation. And we want to do a required field. This is a numeric field, so I'm not going to allow the user to type anything they want in there. I'm going to ask them to put in a whole number. I'm also going to not ignore blank cells. If you leave blank cells ignored, then you can leave them blank. The user can go through them and it doesn't cause any errors. I want this to be a required field, so I'm going to click on that and say that it has to be entered. Now you might think that's enough, but it's not. When you do this data validation, you have to, regardless if all you want to say is I need a number, you still have to give it a range. So what I'm going to say here, just to make this work, is say that it's not equal to, and then put in a value of 0. Click on OK. If I type my name in there, I said I wanted a number, this is what you get. You get an error message. Now this error message is not very helpful. We're going to fix that here in just a second. It says what you entered isn't valid. The user, I don't know why it says user, the programmer, if you will, has restricted values that you can enter into this cell, but it doesn't give you any clue of why it's wrong. So I'm going to cancel that. When you click on cancel, it wipes out the result, or if the user clicks on cancel, it wipes out what they typed and lets them start over again. Let's see. Let's leave it blank and see what happens. I press enter, nothing happens, so I guess it doesn't require it. It should, I thought it would, but I think because that's equal to 0, it's gonna let it go. I'm gonna type a 0 in here, and there's my error again. Okay, so I can leave it blank. At least it seems I can leave it blank, but I can't type in empty values, or just a 0. What I'm going to do is change the data validation, because really all of our student ID numbers are 8 digits long and they start at least with a 1, maybe numbers bigger than that. So I'm going to go back to data validation, and in my whole number I'm going to say that it has to be greater than, and then my minimum value is 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it has to be, that's going to force it to be at least an 8-digit number. And while I'm here, I'm also going to go to the error alert. The error alert allows you to define your own error messages. Instead of that goofy error message that showed up that said the user says that's not good, doesn't tell them what's wrong, you get to define your own. First thing you need to designate, excuse me, is what type of error message box do you want. There are 3 kinds. There's a stop, meaning you got to fix this. There's a warning, which provides an opportunity for the user to override the data validation. I'll show you that one. And then there's another just for information that doesn't stop the user from entering it, but does pop this message up if certain conditions occur. In this case, I do not want the user to enter any user IDs that are not 8-digit numbers. So in here, I'm going to say invalid ID. This is the title that appears at the top of the error message when it comes up. So it kind of appears up here. And then down here I can type in anything I want. Something like, please enter an 8-digit, I can't type today, student ID number. Click on OK. Alright, scrolled away for some reason. Now if I go in here, let me see if that changed anything. Nope. I'm now going to type in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 nines. That's not big enough. And I get my error message, and notice there's my title. There's the type of error message, the stop, and please enter an 8-digit student ID number. Now remember we saw in the first example that if you click on cancel, it's going to remove that value. If you click on retry, it'll go back to the cell, but it'll leave what the user typed. Actually, this cancel restores the cell to the value it had when we started. Now in this case that was blank. But if there was an original value there, cancel puts that original value back. I'm going to do a retry. Notice it highlights the numbers. Doesn't really matter which one of those the user can, which one you choose, either retry or cancel, the user can still fix the error. But because it is a stop dialog box, there is no way the user can override that and say that's the student ID number, use it. I'm going to use the first student ID number, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. I know that because I built this spreadsheet. Enter, and now it lets it go without any errors. So that's the first kind of data validation, making sure the field is there. Okay. We can also define field validation to make sure that values that are entered by the user are within a range. My credits, for instance. At Midstate, we don't have any classes that have credits more than 6. So what I'm going to do is define a data validation rule that says you have to, go back to settings here, you have to put in a number, whole number or a number with decimal places. We do have some classes with decimal places, 2.5 credit classes, they're pretty rare. So I'm just going to ignore those for the purposes of this example and say I want a whole number. And here the default for the whole numbers is between. And since I want the number to be between 1 and 6, makes it very simple. Now, of course, as you saw in the last example, we can put not between, we can put not equal, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. You can use any of those choices to define the limits that are on these data. If I said less than or equal to 6, that would allow a 0. So what I like about the between is it only allows whole numbers between 1 and 6. And by the way, between doesn't literally mean between. Between includes these endpoints. 1 and 6 are acceptable. And go to the error alert. Now in this case, maybe we built a new class. They're pretty rare, but maybe we build a new class and it's 7 credits. I want to make this a warning so that if the user enters 7 credits, they'll have the opportunity to say, I'll take it. So in the title here, I'll say credits out of range. In the message, I'll say credits are normally between 1 and 6. Click yes to accept this value. Click no to edit the value, or change the value. And click cancel to erase the value. And put all that in the error message, and you'll see when the dialog box pops up that this kind of gives the user some clue to what they should do. One of the other things we can do is press enter in our message here, and it starts new lines. Press enter there and here, even though I don't need it, because I want these to be on separate lines regardless of how wide that error message box is. And I click on OK. So now we need to test that. What happens if I put in a 0? And I get the message. Credits are normally between 1 and 6. Click yes to accept it, no to change it. That's the same as retry, and then cancel to wipe it out. And put it back to what it was. Notice when you hit cancel, it goes back to what it was. So I could change my message and say to restore the original value. I'm not going to mess with that here. All right, so 0 doesn't work. How about 1? That's the limit. That's acceptable. How about 6? That's acceptable. How about 7? That's not acceptable, but I can say yes, and it continues and allows that value to stay in there. All right, So that's the difference between a warning and a stop. A warning allows the user to override. They get the error message and they go, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Leave the 7 alone. All right, I'm going to undo that a couple times, put it back to its 3 that it started with. Okay, now I have this data validation in here. I've tested it and it works. Unfortunately, I didn't highlight all the rest of these cells ahead of time, and so now I've got a problem. This one's got data validation, but this doesn't. We saw in the first recording that when you enter formulas, they're automatically copied down. Data validation doesn't work that way. You might consider copying the format here using the Format Painter on the Home tab. Unfortunately, if I use the Format Painter and work my way down, data validation is not part of formatting. Let's try it. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's do a couple of them here. Okay, then click on this one and go back to data validation. Let's see if there's any in there. No, there's no data validation. So that didn't work. It's not a formatting thing. You could use the fill handle, but if I use the fill handle and drag this down, all the values are going to change to 3, and so I don't want that. I did, by accident, discover a way that I can copy this, though. If you highlight all the cells now, so I'm going to click on that first one that's got the data validation in it. I'm going to click or hold on the keyboard, Shift and down arrow to go to the last cell on that column that's filled in. If I now hit data validation, Excel recognizes that, hey, wait a minute. Some of these cells have validation in them. Do you want me to transfer that or extend that to all the other cells? So this is how you would easily say yes. That we can check it, make sure everything's good. Okay. And then you can check the error alert, and it makes sense. We could change this to restore the value. Might be a little confusing for some people. And now I should have data validation here. We can do a quick check. And there it pops up. So now all of these cells have that data validation in them. One other thing we can do with data validation, and that's provide some tips to the user. Some people like to use comments for that. The book shows you how to do that. You do an insert comment, and whenever you rest your pointer on this cell, just hover over it, you'll get the tip. What I'm going to do is use an input message to tell the user to start here by entering an 8-digit ID before they even try it. I always think it's a little unfair to have these rules and not tell the user what the rules are. So in this case, I'm going to provide an input message. So notice that's a second tab here. The input message, I can also put in a title, and that's where I'm going to put the start here. This is optional. If you don't put it in, you just get the message. Press the tab key, and down here, enter a student's 8-digit ID number. Click on OK. And in that cell, whenever it has focus, when it is the current cell, this pops up. All right, if I go away, it goes away. Give it there, it comes back again. So that's another way that you can bring up some tips to the user that will not go away until the user leaves that cell. Some people don't like that. Comments are the other way you could do this, but it's not really linked to the error messages. What Excel allows you to do is define data validation, define error messages for the data validation, and provide a clue to the user what you're looking for all at the same time in that save dialog box. So I'm going to save this, and now you know about data validation. That will prevent the user from entering in. Oops, I skipped one. I didn't do a list validation. Where did that go? All right, back to the grade records. For my grades here, I want to do list validation. There's a list already in the Lookups tab of acceptable grades. This is the only grades I want to accept. So back in the grade records, I can make sure that the user picks something from that list. To do list validation, you click Data Validation, Settings. Instead of any value, I'm going to pick from a list. And now you have two choices. You can simply type your list here if you want to. And notice when you have list validation, a little drop-down arrow appears next to the cell, and you can drop it down, and there's my values. So all I did in there for adding my own values is simply type the values, and I want it separated with commas and spaces. You probably don't even need the spaces. I did test it. I could have made this Volcker Gall with spaces in it. It's the commas that separate things. But I don't want my own list. I want the list from that lookup table. To do that, You can collapse this dialog box to kind of get it out of the way. This is optional. I'm going to collapse it, get it out of the way, go to the lookups table. And here's my list of grades that I want. Once you've gotten the range defined, expand it again. I need an error alert. This will be a stop because if they put the wrong grade in, that's a problem. You must select a grade from the list. I'm not going to put any input messages in. Most people know what to do with grades. So now I click here and I drop that down, and there's all my grades from that range. If I try to type something in here that's not on the list and leave, I get yelled at. I can cancel to restore it, or I can retry to highlight that and replace it. Now all I need to do is copy that all the way down. This is only applied to here. If I click here, there's no validation. So once again, I'm going to do the shift and down arrow, go to data validation. It says you want me to extend that. The answer is yes. Click on OK. And now whenever I click to any of these, I get a list of things to choose from. This kind of stuff can be applied anywhere. I might have in my lookups a complete list of all the programs that students can enroll in. And obviously I don't want somebody enrolled in a program that we don't have. With these types of programs, they could very likely make typing errors. Do I want spaces around the dashes or not want spaces around the dashes? If you're inconsistent, and you'll see some of the statistics that we generate later, could be inaccurate. So you want to be consistent there. Might not be a bad idea to have a lookup of all of our approved programs and then add validation here, so make sure you pick one of those. So that's list validation. List validation actually gives you two things. It ensures that the values are appropriate, but it also gives the user a list to choose from, so they don't have to necessarily type it. I think that covers everything I wanted to in data validation. That should make your users' data entry a little more accurate so that your results are as accurate as they can be.